Oh, I'm already live on Facebook. Hello, hello, hello. So, if I appear a little distracted, it's only because I'm pulling you up on Facebook so I can interact with you. Welcome to Ask the Rev Anything. I tend to think of this as a ministerial sandbox where we just get to play with one another. So let me get you guys pulled up here so that I can see who's joining. Do I have even the live stream going here? Should be, but I'm not seeing it. Ah. Technology is my friend. There it is. All right. So, welcome everybody on Facebook. Welcome anybody who's tuning in through YouTube. We have one person here in the room with me. Woohoo! When I said we were going to slowly reopen, everybody took me seriously. So we are doing it quite slowly. So let's start with a brief centering and meditation and see where we go from there. So I invite you just to let everything in your immediate area have its place rather than your attention, unless you're driving. And if you are listening to this while you're driving, please continue to keep your attention on your driving. All right, so let's just go within. Just allow yourself to become aware of your breath. The gentle rise and fall of life breathing you. And I invite you to know with me that breath is the breath of the One, the infinite, the very source, the very substance of creation breathing you. To know with me that you are a divine, purposeful, intentional, unique, one-of-a-kind, unrepeatable idea, physically expressed in form of that one creator. Whatever name works for you to relate to it, know that it is all there is. That it is unfolding itself in, through, as, and around you, as you. That its intelligence is your intelligence. That its abundance is your abundance. That its breath is your breath. Its mind is your mind. Its creative, infinite creative potential and power is your creative potential and power. That being created out of the wholeness and perfection and completeness of creation itself, you are that in form. So nothing is missing in you. You are incomplete in no way, shape, or form. And so know that all that your heart desires is a desire of Creator itself, fully available for you to experience. And so I invite you to bring to mind, to at least in this moment, embody a sense of gratitude that you already are everything you desire to be, that you already have everything you think you need, and to allow yourself to feel a sense of celebration. To own it as being real before you see it. This is the activity of faith. So in this gratitude, from this place of gratitude, I invite you to release, to let go with full confidence that it's already done, that there's nothing for you to compel and everything for you to become aware of, to say yes to. I invite you to anchor this word of the infinite with me as we say together, Amen. Amen. Shalom. Aho. Ashe. And so it is. So for those of you joining for the first time, here's what we do. For the past couple of months, I gathered questions from you, and I put them on this wheel. And so we very simply spin the wheel and see what question the infinite lands on for us to explore. And I invite you to post your comments on Facebook. I can actually see them, and so I can interact with you on Facebook. I see that Barbara Witt is with us, that Deborah Ellis is with us. And so anyone else that cares to join, jump on in. And here we go with the first spin of the wheel. What does science of mind teach about Jesus? It's a great question for this time of the year. It almost seems like the infinite is like paying attention, doesn't it? So here's what I know that we teach in Science of Mind. That Jesus is the great example of what is available to us in human form. That he knew oneness. He understood oneness. He related to oneness. He lived from oneness. And that he is the example of how we can do that. During this particular time of year and the whole idea of the crucifixion and the resurrection, my understanding of that was this was his final teaching to show us that we're not our bodies, that our bodies contain the truth of us, but they are not the truth of us. And so whatever in this earthly plane can happen to our body, while we may in fact experience physical pain and trauma, we don't experience spiritual pain and trauma. Because that wholeness, that perfection, our spiritual essence cannot be harmed. Do you have anything to add? Any thoughts come up for you? Because this is really an open discussion. So if you have any thoughts you want to add, I make space for you to do that. And folks on Facebook can do that too. So, any thoughts on that? What we teach about Jesus?
Well, what I learned from another Science of Mind church in Southern California was that the word God was only mentioned once in the Science of Mind beginner's book, or the book, the original book, and at that time, the definition of God, I think, is different from the definition that we use 80, 90 years later.
Mm-hmm.
And not being able to understand what the word has of significance to can really trip up a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
So having a definition limits
Mm-hmm.
the word Jesus or God.
Yeah.
And that's not mentioned often enough.
Yeah. So what she's sharing, because I don't know if you guys can hear her through my microphone, what is being shared is that her experience of the early teachings of science of mind is that God was only mentioned once in the very early text, and that it's a slippery slope when we begin to define the infinite. And I would completely concur with that. I think that's where the reference to I am really begins and ends. And David Bohm, the physicist David Bohm, who is one of my gurus, if I have any, talks about this, that if we simply stop at a recognition of I am, we leave the door open for infinite understanding, for infinite inquiry. And because we're in human form, we have this wonderful component called an ego. And our ego feels safest when things are neatly, tightly defined. And so we're constantly invited to that dance of, as Dr. Holmes said, being open at the top or being limited by the comfort zone of our ego. I invite you to throw out the good, bad, right, and wrong of that and simply allow yourself to dance in the both and of that. I have never been a proponent of ego smashing. I'm pretty sure that whatever this magnificence is that created humanity knew exactly what it was doing. And for me to suggest that the ego is bad or wrong or needs to be smashed is to suggest that it made a mistake. And I don't think that's true. Now, some folks may, and they get to. I am just here to articulate what my understanding is. That's why it's a conversation. I am an expert on nothing other than my own limited understanding that is continuing to expand. How about you folks on Facebook? Anything you want to chime in with? Because I can't hear you, but I can read you if you type it. And I'm also aware that we have this wonderful 30-second to minute delay. So that's an interesting thing to navigate in technology. And I see Dell has joined us. Hey, Dell. I get to actually pause and recognize people on Wednesday night. I can't really do that very well on Sunday morning because there's way too many moving parts on Sunday morning. What is the function of the ego? The function of the ego is our human physical safety. I mean, if we think back to the beginning of humankind, if we didn't have an ego, I'm pretty sure the species would not have survived. Right? I'm pretty sure. So there was a time that the ego had a much more, the word that comes to mind is relevant, had a much more relevant function and place than it needs to have now. I mean, I imagine myself, coming to awareness on planet Earth with nothing other than my birthday suit, right? Because the first arrivals, I'm imagining, there they were, all of a sudden, poof, human being here on planet Earth. And, I imagine noticing the sun and feeling its warmth and having no idea what the sun is. I just know it feels good on my body. And then as night falls, I notice whatever that was that felt really good is gone, and perhaps my physical being feels cold, right? And so I'm trying to survive, and who knows what, actually happened. But I know through studying evolution that eventually the survival skills began to understand that this thing called fire could actually warm us, and related to shelter, and all of that is coming from that limbic survival brain. And so, if we can understand our ego's history, but we're not still there, right? We have homes now, and some of us live in them, and some of us do not. So I want to acknowledge that. Not just because there are homes on planet Earth does not mean everybody lives in one. Okay? The ego is about physical safety. The problem is when we let the ego lie to us about our spiritual safety, about our emotional safety, about our mental safety. Because being hardwired for safety, the ego is hardwired to look for problems, right? That's its job, which still has a place, but because it has less to look for, it overdoes it. Okay? It overdoes it. And it, I've taught this many times, and the ego is the part of me that was born with a PhD in MSU. And that is a PhD in making stuff up. The ego, when it doesn't actually have a threat to navigate, begins to experience the lack of something to navigate as the threat. So the more at peace we get, the more the ego tends to fire up looking for problems, because it doesn't know what to do with peace. It knows to look for problems, right? And so when we understand that about our ego, we can begin to dance with it. We can begin to empower it to do its job without surrendering our authority to it doing a job that it's navigating a threat that actually isn't there. And it's a dance. I will offer you this. And I see the comment in the thing, so then we need the ego for safety. Absolutely. Absolutely. So before I tell you about my dance theory, here's the thing with the ego. And sometimes our social conditioning gets in the way of that. Fear, the freeze, fight, flight part of us, biologically, right, operates before conscious thought, right? Scientifically, medically, that system is activated absent of thought. Our thought about it becomes engaged after it's engaged. Now, why is that important? Because it is a perfect system until we interfere with it, with our thought. Right? There are so many incidences. The most palpable to me are the ones from 9/11, where so many people, for no apparent reason, changed their mind about going to work that day. They were on the subway, headed to work, and something inside of them said, go home, stop, turn around, leave. That is the perfection of the ego communicating. That part does not communicate in sentences. It communicates in one-word commands. The problem is we don't listen to it. All right? Our brain gets involved, our emotional issues get involved, our socialization gets involved, and we have a tendency to call that our ego. I'm not sure it is. I think it interferes with the ego, quite honestly. When I was a deputy, more than once interviewed folks that said, you know what, something inside me told me not to go in there, and I did it anyway. And you know, the one I remember the most, somebody pulled up in the parking lot of a 7-Eleven. Their intention was to go in the store, get a soft drink, pay for it, get back in the car and back on the road. As they pulled into the parking lot, something inside them said, go to a different store. Leave now. They had a conversation with that part of them and said, look, I'm just going in here, I'm just going to grab a soda and I'm going to leave, so I'm going to do this. What they were not aware of in human form was the individual that was standing about 3 feet away from the counter getting ready to rob the place. And so they went straight back to the cooler where their drink was, and by the time they took the drink out of the cooler, there was a gun brandished at the counter, and now they were part of a hostage situation. All of that avoidable if we learn how to listen to that inner voice that says leave. Right? But the ego wants explanations. The ego wants to rationalize and justify and dig a little deeper. And so there's that, we need it for safety, but we also need to train it to listen to the intuitive that is picking up on energetic things in our environment before our lizard brain catches up. And so, those of you that spend any time with me know that I am a solid both and guy. I am not an either or guy. And so it's both and. Our ego is absolutely part of our safety system, and when it runs amok, it's part of our threat system, right? And so it's how do we do that dance? For me, I literally envision it as a dance. That I have two dance partners as a human being. My spiritual dance partner and my ego, right? My spiritual essence and my ego are the dance partners on my dance floor of life. Who's leading the dance is the only question, right? Who's leading the dance? And when I fall asleep spiritually, well, my ego is happy to take over the dance, right? It may or may not do the dance that is best for me, but it will do the dance that it is most comfortable doing, which is typically an older dance, right? And it dances to the music that it hears, whether it's the music that's being played or not. Okay. And so when we get out of alignment, it's just a matter of whispering lovingly, gently in my ego's ear. I fell asleep. I'm awake now. I'm taking the lead back. Right? And there are those awkward moments where we're struggling for who's going to lead, and then finally, when I stand my ground spiritually, my ego comes into alignment with my lead, and the dance is much smoother. So there's that. So, okay. Any more comments or feedback there on Facebook? Do 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 do. There's another comment. The comment says, "Thank you, Rev. We need our ego, and I thank Spirit for it. So when we hear, get rid of your ego, you can know that it is not the complete picture. We dance with it, correct?" Absolutely. Absolutely. If it's all God, and this is hard for us to wrap ourselves around, folks, and I believe it has to be true. If it's all God, then it's all God, right? You can't have it's all God and then have something else. We can't have all God, meaning all good, all spirit, all divinity, all I amness, whatever label works for you, okay? It can't be all whole, perfect, and complete, and then have things, people, expressions of divinity that need to be eliminated. Earlier today, I had the pleasure of doing a candid conversation with two of my colleagues, Reverend Cassandra and Reverend Abigail, and it was wonderful, especially with today being International Transgender Visibility Day. It was wonderful to, as a transgender man, to be seen and celebrated and be able to talk about the magnificent diversity of creation, right? So it really comes down to what part of God do we want to get rid of and why? And part of the conversation this afternoon was when we misidentify, when we equate people to their behavior, everybody's in trouble because nobody is their behavior. Right? Our behavior is evidence of our belief. It is not the truth of our being. And so part of this ego dance, if you will, is helping the ego understand that it is a function within our wholeness. It is not our identity. Because part of its desire for safety tells it that its identity is its safety. And that becomes our limitation in this human realm. And so, will we dare to lean into, it's interesting, we, tangent number 937. Yeah.
Is the ego not the desire or the desire to have a label so that we can make it a firm black or white issue?
Oh, absolutely.
Shades of gray, and we can
Yeah.
have just a one word or one
Mhm.
phrase answer and put it in another box.
Yes. So the question was, is the ego that part of us that wants nice, tight, definitive labels that make things black and white so that we know where to file it, what box to put it in? Absolutely, that is a function of the ego. Because, see, the more limited the definition, the less threat there is. All right. Well, yeah, and so, but understand what's happening there. The less threat equals limitation. That's the ego. That's not the truth of you. Because the truth of us is we're infinite beings. Right? Infinite, pretty sure has no limitation. By definition, infinite has no limitation. Now, in my hillbilly wisdom, that scares the bejabbers out of our ego. Because they don't know what to do with that. The ego wants those tight little boxes, those tight little definitions, those finite labels. And our infinite nature blows that all to pieces. So rather than smashing our ego, perhaps we can love it. Yes, I'm aware that the folks in-house don't have a microphone. That's why I repeat back what they say, because not everybody who attends in person wants to be on a microphone. So in the activity of inclusion, we make space for that. Because I have one, and they could even come up here and be on camera, but they get to choose that piece. So yes, you're getting what they're saying, Barbara. You're just getting it reiterated through me, because no, I know you can't hear them through my microphone. But thanks for popping that in the chat. The ego is a funny thing. And the more we can be compassionate, that's why, on Sunday morning we say that thing about, we practice compassion first with ourselves, then one another, then the world. There's a reason for that. You cannot be compassionate with someone else when you can't be compassionate with yourself. You don't have compassion to give. And so perhaps being compassionate with your ego is the starting point of true compassion. instead of being mad at it, instead of wanting to choke the life out of it, what if we met our ego with the same love and tenderness and compassion that our Creator meets us, with that non-judgmental, and we see only the perfection of the ego, even when it runs amok, right? Because here's the thing, it can't run amok without your participation. Right? See, if we make our ego separate, like it's some foreign being that's attacking us and taking over, and some alien life force that has abducted us, well, no. It's yours. And it will come into alignment with the love that you give it, just like everything else on this planet. Creator is all there is. Love is the greatest power there is. Instead of smashing our ego, what if you try loving it? What if you try talking to it like you would a scared child? What if you teach it? I am absolutely convinced that my spiritual practice is the boot camp for my ego. Okay? Because my spiritual essence doesn't need to practice. It knows exactly who and what it is. It knows exactly how to be what it is. My humanness needs to practice, needs to remember. Why? Because my ego needs to be schooled constantly. Right? Because its nature is to find problems. Its nature, its design, its function. That's not going to change. Right? I was outside earlier this afternoon doing a little bit of yard work here at the center, thinking about the Sunday talk. And one of the things that came to mind was I think it's a Saturday morning cartoon, or maybe there's a movie, How to Train Your Dragon. And it's a kid's movie. And perhaps we should all watch the movie How to Train Your Dragon to learn how to train our ego. To lighten up a little bit, hold all of this a bit more lightly and lovingly, and with gratitude and appreciation. Because it really is an amazing gift. If you have not read the book, The Gift of Fear by Gavin DeBecker, I highly recommend it. Highly recommend it. It is one of the most empowering, normalizing books about how to embrace the gift of our ego and to turn much of our messiness into a message. It's just a fabulous book. Fabulous book. Okay, any other questions in the chat there, folks? If not, I may spin the wheel one more time here. Because we can do it however we want to do it. Barbara Witt says it's a good movie. All right, How to Train Your Dragon. All right. So I'm going to spin it one more time, and we'll see what else wants to be offered up here. This is my new ministerial toy. Okay, here's the question. If we live in an abundant universe, why is there poverty? Well, the short answer is because not all of us know we live in an abundant universe. If we back up just a little bit and recognize that given that there's one thing, right, that everything is created out of, the only thing it can expand, it's already infinite, so it can't expand infinite, right? How do you add to infinite, right? You can't. It's already eternal, and so nothing can ever be lost because it's infinite. Nothing can be added. The one thing that it can expand is its experience of itself. Okay? Now, if it replicates itself, if it maintains control, even if it created an infinite form but maintained control, it would simply be replicating its experience of itself in different forms. And we would literally be automatons controlled by something outside of ourselves. And so the only way that creation can expand its experience of itself is to create and then let go. That's the part of creation that blows my mind, quite honestly. Because whatever this I amness is, this indefinable everything, trusts its creation to eventually remember and know its truth, that it lets go completely. It lets us use its creative process. It never rejects us. It never pulls away from us. It never scolds us. Imagine parenting this way. Imagine giving birth to children and then letting them have 100% control over everything they choose. That's what Creator does. And so we can choose to remember, we can choose to listen to that inner voice that is always there, or the ego is what's in charge, and socialization is what's in charge. And we don't know that we are infinite beings, that we are abundant beings living in an abundant universe, and that experiencing that abundance is as simple as choosing it. We don't know that. And so out of separation, out of not knowing, poverty is one of the results of that. Now, I want to be really careful here, because historically, New Thought, along with every other religion that I'm aware of and have studied, is typically taught by the people that have at least some understanding of it, right? And we have a tendency to present it in a way that I believe, unintentionally so, but marginalizes people who don't know. as if they somehow want to not know. I often hear us use the word, well, they just don't want their lives to change. And I would submit to you, you know this how. You don't know what they want. You don't know what they know. I think if we're being really honest with ourselves, most days we don't even know what we want. Right? Most of the time we look to society's tendencies and mores to tell us what we should want, which means we really don't know what we want. And I believe if we really had clarity that our wants are really our soul, which is really the activity of creation desiring to express itself, that this whole idea of who wants what would shift, because our wants are not about form. Last Sunday, I mentioned the Michael Beckwith quote, 100% of spiritual awakening, 100% of spiritual growth is about releasing. It's not about getting. We already are everything we want. And when we look at our spiritual abundance as getting things, we're already confused. Because when we know what we are, then we get to use that. We're empowered to use that to manifest our abundance in form. We don't live in a world where we teach one another this. We teach each other that we're separate, right? That we got to work hard to get stuff. We got to compete with one another. Depending on the culture you're raised in, you know, I remember as a kid, my dad sitting me on a dog food barrel, looking me in the eye and saying, you're an Ellis by God. You don't take nothing from nobody. You earn your keep or it's not yours. Well, thank you for that limitation. Right? Our abundance, our growth, our experience of our divinity is about removing those lies. It's about removing the limitations that we've been taught. Now that does not mean that we don't care for one another on this planet. It doesn't mean that we don't give to one another. Again, it's a both and. It's not an either or. But the whole reason that there's poverty, I think, is because we don't know that there's abundance. Right? And even more recently, our idea socially of abundance is that there's a limited pool. 1% has too much. The other 99% need to go to economic war with them and capitalism to get their share. That's a poverty consciousness. Right? Because it's a consciousness from a limitation. And I'm not, let's be really clear, I have my moments where I want in this human realm part of what the 1% has. Because I am in no way, in earthly terms, part of that 1%. And I'm also learning and remembering and relearning every day that my abundance is not established by form, that my understanding and embodiment of my abundance shows up in form. But if I think my abundance out here validates my abundance in here, I am always coming from a poverty consciousness, because I'm always coming from a consciousness of I'm missing something. There's something in me that needs to be added to. And that's never going to manifest in abundance. Let me see what you have here in the chat, Miss Barbara. That's a toughie, especially for those who are on the side of poverty. Absolutely. Absolutely. Why is it that people seem to think they know what other people want? I think that is, the easy word would just be arrogance, Barbara, but I think what it really is we know so little about ourselves. I know we don't have enough time for it tonight, but one of my favorite questions on this wheel is right here. It says, why do humans resist taking responsibility? And I think that one has a whole lot to do with your question. It's, if I can focus all of my attention on judging you and criticizing you and getting all up in your thoughts, I don't have to attend to my own, right? I think it's part of, dare I say, victim consciousness. Because most of the time when we're talking about what other people want, it is from a place that what they want hurts us somehow, right? And, people that are hurt by the actions of addiction, well, they just want to stay loaded. You know this, how? Right? But it's easier to blame someone than to take the time to connect with them, to understand, to ask questions. And so our ego, let's wrap up right where we started. Our ego defaults to guilt, shame, and blame because in its limited understanding, it finds some sense of safety in that it's not my fault. And I'll leave you with this. What if it's nobody's fault? What if there is no blame? What if there is no shame? What if everybody is just in the process of remembering who they are? Have an amazing week. I love you dearly. I hope you join me on Sunday. You can find the links to all of that on our Facebook page here. If you would like to get our newsletter, email me at revrafe@sierracenter.org, and I will hook you up. All right. So I'm going to go off camera so I can go over there and shut all of this down. Have a fabulous evening, folks.